Hello and welcome to yet another episode of one of your favorite shows, I'm sure, Mastering Dungeons. I am Shawn Merwin here with my effervescent co-host Teos Abadia. Hey Teos, tell me the good news.
The good news, I don't have great news. You have great news. You went to Origins. You got to go to a convention.
I I did. I was a convention goer. The first time I've been back to Origins since I want to say 2019, but it might have even been past that.
Wow. Yeah,
But it was a convention. Yeah, it was a
it was.
convention. It definitely did not rival the days back when the Adventurers League was there running 80 tables of the D&D Open, and there were banners and costumes and all sorts of
Yeah.
things. And yeah, that's just the AL side. Even throughout the rest of the convention, two of the largest vendors that were in the vendor hall were Arcane Wonder and World of Game Design.
Well, I mean,
And
congratulations to
those
them.
are
But yeah. But that's
right,
surprising
right,
given the
exactly.
typical
And so
names.
I
Yeah.
exactly. So I talked to both Arcane Wonder and World of Game Design, and the consensus was, yeah, it's great that we are like the largest vendor here. World of Game Design was running adventures and manning booths on behalf of several companies. So um,
Mm,
Modifius and uh, Borg and many companies were being represented by World of Game Design. Arcane Wonder is a good card and board game company, obviously, and but they were like, it might be better if we weren't the biggest
mm,
vendors here because that just shows where this place is going.
yeah.
And all of the vendors that weren't at Origins seem to be attending Gen Con. So
Mm,
Paizo and Wizards and right, all of those
yeah.
were
Yeah.
uh were lacking from Origin. So, but
Yeah.
we'll see if
So
it continues to grow.
I am interested along those lines since you mentioned Wizards. Like, I haven't heard a single thing about the next summit. And I'm curious kind of what's in the works. Though
Mm,
and I forget whether we have it in our show notes. I don't think I do, so I'll mention it now, which is that I saw
mm,
that Daniel Kwan had a review of the virtual tabletop because apparently the digital attendees of the first summit, so those people who are virtual and not in
mm,
person, were the first round of invitees to playtest the latest version of the virtual tabletop.
mm.
And so on his blog, he has a write up of kind of what he found. I think I meant to include that in the show notes. I forgot. So talking about it now, but that's interesting because I guess there has been some involvement there, but nothing that I've heard in terms of saying like, hey, here's what's going on at Gen Con.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as we've reported before, that next summit was supposed to be taking place or is supposed to be taking place at Origins, but I have not heard any invitees. If they have been invited, they
Gen
have
Con.
not let that be known at this point. Or Gen Con, yeah. I'm gonna mix up every word. I'm gonna say everything backwards, so just be ready for that. But
Fair.
Gen Con isn't that far away. Gen Con is like a month
Oh,
and a half
I was just
or
looking at
less.
PAX West.
So
It's all around the
yeah,
corner.
oh, it's coming up quickly. But I had fun at Origins. I went expecting to run some 5e content officially for Ghostfire Gaming when I then realized that we weren't actually running official Ghostfire Gaming content at
Hmm.
Origins. But I was asked by folks at World of Game Design to run some 2D20 Star Trek adventures. They said, "Could you run this?" And I said, "I my name is in the book, so yes, I guess I have to say I can run it." And it was run, and I think everybody had a good time,
I'm
and I think
sure.
I got the rules right about 90% of the time, so we will call that a victory. And to tell you the truth, you come away from convention sometimes drained and sometimes invigorated, and I came away from this one invigorated.
Awesome.
You know it I was working a lot back at the hotel room on some deadlines, but I did get to run. I did get to have those conversations with a few industry people who I haven't met before or who I'm fast friends with, and I came away really ready to get to work. So I felt like that was worth it.
That's awesome. Good. Invigorated Shawn. Exactly what we
Yep.
need.
And invigorated. And I am so invigorated that we're going to only answer one question from our listener corner. However, it is a doozy. It is a really, really good question. Sort of calling me out a little bit, and I'm cool with that. So, John Andrew Bellner via YouTube says Shawn and everyone else on the internet always mentions quote slowing down the game, but it's always after talking about something that is, at least for me, part of the game, like searching for things like secret doors in every dungeon room. Saying that slows down the game is literally taking away big pieces of some player character function and purpose. Combat slows down the game. We could skip that. What kind of game are people playing that skips over or hand waves so much? Honest question. And yeah, John, I take it as an honest question, and I don't,
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel called out. And I feel like that's what I like to hear. I like to hear a little pushback. And so let me start by saying there is a difference, I think, between slowing down the game and slowing down the game too much. There's also a potential problem that people rarely talk about with running a game that goes too quickly. So slowing down the game is really an inelegant way of saying making the game or the story tedious for yourself or for your players. Now we put in the caveat that everyone wants something different from the game. So one person's beautiful pace is another person's horrible slog or sprint. But what your question gets to is a fundamental one to not just D&D but role-playing game design. And I feel like I should do a whole video on this now, but I'm going to try to tackle it this way. And I'm going to get rambling on, Teo. So
Mm-hmm.
while you take a big drink, feel free to interject at any point. So
I'm
let's
already
take an
thinking, and
example
I'm
of
listening
what.
and thinking at the same time.
Yep, and thinking at the same. Okay, so the example John gives up is searching for secret doors in every dungeon room. So let me give an example and show and illustrate the issues, the conundrum that we're in as role playing game designers. The characters are searching for missing folks who were last seen in the vicinity of a haunted mansion, supposedly haunted mansion. So you get the idea. You get the curse of
Mm-hmm.
Strahd Castle, uh, so that sort of thing.
Saltmarsh.
A big castle. Yeah. So the characters go into the mansion and begin looking through the rooms for clues. What happened to these missing people? So they come to a bedroom, maybe the first room. Maybe they go right upstairs. First bedroom they come to. Here we go. They go in, and the DM says, "In this bedroom, maybe there's a subscription. Maybe there's a description. There's a bed. There's a set of drawers. There's a desk with many compartments. There's a large painting of the family who owned it. There's an ornate rug on the floor. There's a dumbwaiter in the wall. And then, not to mention candelabras and other things. So here's a situation where the players are presented with this encounter, this area. How is this handled by the game? What do the rules of D&D tell us for the characters who are about to search that room? They really don't. They really don't tell us specifically as DMs how to handle that. Do you have the characters inspect each feature of the room individually? I search the bed. I search the chest of drawers. I search the desk. Or do you have them search each wall individually, each floor individually, the ceiling individually? Is it by 5-foot sections? Is it by 10-foot sections? Is it now? If you have a single investigation or perception check, because really the game doesn't tell us exactly which to use, so we end up using both. If you have a single one to cover the entire room, that's great. That might be perfect for your group.
Mm-hmm.
However, what if everyone fails? What happens then? Oh, we just so happens everyone fails this check, which will happen. We've all been there as DMs. That's happened. So what do we do then? Well, what we normally do then is the players not wanting to miss anything say, well, I will individually check the bed. I will. So we're moving like closer and closer to success. So do you allow that? You've already made the check. You've already failed. Okay. So we're going to allow this now. So we've already had 6 rolls that have led nowhere. And we're moving now to these individual things. Okay, cool. So they start investigating these features. Do we roll checks on each and every item? Do you have a check for the bed? Oh, these first three people failed that check. Oh, but the fourth person made it. Okay. Do you then say under the covers, what about the pillow? Do you specifically make people guess what they're going to check?
And
Okay,
the
so we
pillow is
do,
a
we
great
don't, we don't know.
example. I just interject here. The pillow is a great
Right.
example because there have been adventures in AD&D and Basic that have
Mhm.
said only if the characters search the pillows or the hollow leg in the bed, right? So you had to call it, which
Mhm.
caused that behavior that you're talking about, right?
Okay. And so now we're getting the situation where we're just basically rolling until people succeed. And if they don't succeed, we find more ways of letting them check more or just giving them the thing. So you're setting up an example of play, and this becomes the example of how it's going to work in every room. What if there are 5 bedrooms in this house? Then the next time you go to a bedroom, you are you are facilitating this kind of play. Now, what if there's nothing special at all in the room? What if the description you gave was what's there at face value? Now, all of those checks, even if they succeed, lead to nothing. So, do you just say to the players, don't bother rolling checks? There's nothing in the room. That's okay, except for the next room they go to. When you describe the room and they wait for you to say, don't roll any checks, there's nothing in the room, and you don't say anything, now they know there's something in the room. So now they all dive in as they did before. And again, all of this is possibly okay, and all of this is possibly horrible depending on the group that you play with.
Mm-hmm.
Since the rules don't specify exactly how to do it, it becomes up to the adventure designer or the DM to figure this out. And that's good in some ways because the DM has a better chance of knowing the player types and the player desires than an adventure writer or even a rules designer. However, are 20 plus checks per room good storytelling? Is that good game design?
Mm-hmm.
Many, not all, but many would say no. Now, maybe John's group, maybe John and John's players love this. Maybe they love this nitty gritty. We are going to think about and mention every single thing in the room, and we are going to touch on each individually. For those of us who have been playing since AD&D times, that's sort of how it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
But games change, times change, audiences change. And I would say it is a vast minority of players that want that level of detail. I think that would tend to bog things down. So those are the things that you as a game designer have to think about, not when you're designing an adventure, when you're designing a game. Wouldn't it be great if the game told us exactly how to do it? And then we would be gamifying it so the player characters who are investing resources into being good at that will actually benefit from being good at that, and those who don't won't. But it's also hard because a lot of times you want to reward success.
Yeah.
So if players are searching something and they roll a success, you want to say yes. You want to say, oh, you searched the bed, you got a 20 on your investigation check. It's hard to say no to that. It's hard to say no. But if you get into the habit of letting players search every single thing and they succeed every single time, and you're saying no, 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 that has a bad feeling
Yeah.
to it. But if you feel the need to say yes, 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 then what are you giving the characters? What are you giving them for that yes? What do players want? Players want magic. Players want treasure. Players want clues that are important to this. So now you're in the position as a DM, if you feel the need to say yes, to give them a magic item, to give them some gold, to give them something important. Well, there's only so many important things you can give until you have a uh, group of second level players, second level characters, with every common and uncommon magic item in the book because they've succeeded on so many checks.
You're taking me
So
back to high
all
school.
of this, exactly. So all of this swirling mass of wanting the game to be fun, wanting the story to be fun, wanting it to move at the pace that your group wants is a wildly divergent and horribly hard to achieve goal. Uh, so that's the idea
Yeah.
of why I say you could really slow things down. Um,
Yeah, and I have
Teos,
two
now that
different.
I've ranted
Yeah,
for a long
yeah. No,
time.
this is great. I love it. I have two. This makes me think of two different things. One is when I first played the Moat House, right, from Temple of Mental Evil, Hamlet. Um, and this was early in my dungeoneering career, right? I was very young, middle school, and every room just felt like it was, a knife's edge of decisions. And what I didn't know is these
Mm-hmm.
rooms were all empty. This first hallway is just completely
Mm-hmm.
empty. But room after room, we would do things, and I was a big part of this. Like I was kind of the I was taking the lead in this. I'd like throw a stone in to see if anything reacted. And then you'd
Mm-hmm.
ask yourself, did nothing happen because there's nothing in the room or because they know and they're waiting for it? So then I would do
Mm-hmm.
something else. And then I'd
Mm-hmm.
finally get in and I'd like separate the furniture from the wall and look in this thing and specify. And then I'd do it again in the next room. And at some point someone said, all right, dude,
Mm-hmm.
stop.
Mm-hmm.
Like too much.
Exactly.
And the funny thing is back
Yeah.
then the game was made to where it could threaten you and it did really reward that behavior, right? What are you
Right.
gonna say?
And as soon as someone says, dude, stop doing that, the next room is the room where you needed to do that or you missed something.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's the problem with the game, with the
yeah.
story, with all
Yeah.
of it trying to come together. And there's just no one way to make everyone happy, and
Well,
there's no one way to make it perfect.
and I think that's where the game does try to make some attempts, right? So the game had this whole like you can take all this time to search a room, and in AD&D, and
Mhm.
then it had the but an elf walking by to sort of make it better, right? An elf might just notice it.
Mhm.
The reality is in play, it still meant you were spending forever searching things. All your spells ran out, all this stuff. It just took forever to search. And after, months of this, you usually came up with something. And this translated to where like all of the players that I used to play with in third edition, who are all old time players then, we would say to the DM, okay, we're going to do door routine alpha. Door routine alpha is the following,
Mhm.
so and so is going to go up to the door and listen to it. So and so is going to go up and check for traps. So and so is going to open the door while the rest of us step back. That's alpha. You cool with it just saying we do door routine alpha? And the DM would be like, yeah, sure. And so we just say, cool. Door routine alpha will always be used unless we tell you otherwise. And then we could just skip that part,
Mhm.
right? We don't have to make checks. He could just have us make a check every now and then if he wanted to, or whatever she wanted to. Just they want to.
Mhm.
Just easy to kind of handle that way because it didn't make sense to at every door in a complex state things
Mhm.
over and over again, right? And that was what we were trying to avoid. And that's that idea of that. What did the players want? What do players, how does it impact the pacing? These are all good questions.
Mhm.
In general, I think where you're coming from that John reacted to is in general, we see the game as trying to get out of situations that are going to be highly repetitive with low payoff.
Mhm.
Right? That's where
Mhm.
this
Yeah.
it's from that understanding of pacing, an understanding of what the game is fun. The game is becoming more of heroic, more about your backstory and the plot and the whatever, and less about did you find the secret door. And it's why when we did our review of Knights Black Agents, the gumshoe system assumes you will find things like this unless you're in a pressure situation,
Mhm.
right? Being shot at, find the secret door, make a check. But otherwise, you have knowledge of architecture or of something like this, ancient places, you just find it.
Mhm.
And the interesting thing that we do as DMs is not hide a door, it's the story behind finding the door and what it tells us about the place. And that's what's
Mhm.
interesting and important.
Yeah. So one of the things that D&D could do in, say, a revised version of 5e is to set up a system that helps gamify, that helps players do this and make characters that would succeed more than others. So rather than just saying, yes, you find everything, or saying you have to make checks on every single thing, you could say, when a party searches an area, choose a primary person. Their check can be assisted by others. And then from top to bottom, list the most important things in the room that are hidden, clues, treasure, whatever. Oh, they did 4 successes. They get the top 4 things on the list. That would gamify it,
Mm-hmm.
but it would also take the onus away from players and DMs to search every single thing. It would move the story along, put the most important clues on top. But again, that would work for me. I'm sure there are some people out there saying, no, that's a terrible idea. And I like to do it. Just give me everything. That's okay too.
Yeah.
But that takes away the players who build a character to find things. So there's no
Yeah.
right
No.
answer, just a lot of wrong answers.
And I think that's where you have to, the game should think through what are the common ways that people are using our rules and therefore what should they look like, but also talk to people about that variance and why these things exist, right? Because we can all look at the map for barrier peaks and realize that if the players are making a check in every single one of those hundreds of little rooms that are all the same, it's going to be a boring session, right?
Mhm. Yeah. So, John, thank you for the question. I hope that clarifies at least where we're coming from. I think Teos did a good job of saying that. And thank you for continuing the conversation. Now we have some news. News, I say.
Mm.
First, if you have paid attention to Larian Games recently, you know that they are the designers of the Baldur's Gate 3 video game. And they have just put up an online game where you can search for a murderer who is loose in Baldur's Gate. So you have to, well, you can, anyone can access this, and we have a link in the show notes. It's bloodandbaldursgate.larian.com. And it allows you to search for this murderer by clicking on a map and going to various sites. Sites that are unlocked, you have access to. Then, after you have done your due diligence and searching, you can vote along with everyone else who's playing to decide which site on the map to unlock next. So you can only investigate unlocked sites. But to vote, you have to sign in with a Larian account. So if you don't have one, you need to give them your information in order to make one to vote. I checked it out really quick. There's a little video that explains how to use it at the site. Did you take a look at it, Teos?
I started to, and then I got distracted. Then I had too many things to write and design over the weekend, so I have not.
Yeah,
But it's sitting here on my browser, staring at me. To someday
yeah,
do. So, but it seems
exactly.
fun. What I
Yeah.
didn't understand
So
is this
yeah,
sort of, is it kind of like at the end? Is there a pot of gold? Is this like a contest? You know what I mean?
I am honestly not sure
Okay, me
because
neither.
the voting aspect means they're only unlocking the areas in Baldur's Gate that people vote highest for.
Yeah.
And then when you go there, it sort of tells you what's there, gives you the NPCs, some things. It also had you have a sort of character that has right now when I look, they had like a token of Speak with Dead and a couple other objects. But I don't know if that's an individual character or the character that everyone is playing as the investigator. So the votes tell this investigator where to go.
Hmm.
There wasn't a good description right at the top of sort of what's at stake and how to
Mm-hmm.
do it. So it was a little unclear.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. The site's beautiful. It looks fun.
Yeah.
So I just don't have the time to
Right.
fully go through it.
But if you do go through it, let us know how it works for you because I am curious and I may jump into it at some point. But it's a neat idea, and I'm curious whether at the end of it there's any sort of like reward or something like that because like when there was the whole find out who has lost their memory thing that took place like on Twitter, and then it involved gaming stores. And one of my friends was heavily involved in it, and he ended up getting like a USB key, a special key that had been given out to a gaming store in
Mm.
his area. And he has that really awesome like D&D logo USB key that had on it the clue, and he had to go to a gaming store and give a password, and then they handed it over to him, right? It was really cool. And he's one of like, 5
Wow.
people to do that, which was really neat. Scattered around the US. So it was, that was a fun contest, and there were rewards and things like that. It's cool.
That's awesome. Origins has ended, so the Origin Award winners have been announced. We have all the winners in our show notes here, and there's also a link to that announcement. Some of note was Origin's fan favorite is Flamecraft by Lucky Duck Games. The board game winners were Creature Comforts by Kids Table Board Gaming in the social and light strategy. Strategy game was Planet Unknown by Adam's Apple Games. Board games thematic was Dead Reckoning by Alderac Entertainment Group, AEG. Card game was Scout. Children's game was Honk. On the RPG side, Coyote and Crow from Coyote and Crow Publishing won RPG Core. RPG Supplement was Agents of Dune by Modiphius. 2D art was Cowboys with Big Hearts by Bully Pulpit Games. 3D art was Fallout Wasteland Warfare, also by Modiphius.
Mhm.
And a few others up there as well.
Very cool.
I'm gonna let you take over the Diana Jones Award finalists.
Yeah, so the next award we can talk about is the Diana Jones Award, which is probably our industry's quirkiest award. It is deliberately opinionated. It boldly looks at products, people, and even concepts that other awards wouldn't consider. So I was looking back at some of the old web pages. Ajit George won last year, right? A person. The concept of
Mhm.
black excellence in gaming won in 2020, and the concept of actual play won in 2018. But other years have seen people and RPGs win the award. So this year we have a number of finalists
Mhm.
that are interesting. We had Linda Kodega, who was the journalist that for IO9 and Gizmodo that covered the OGL probably closer than any other individual. And I'll add more to that later, but we'll go on to the next one. Again, Coyote and Crow, role playing game by Connor Alexander that looks at what if in this alternate universe there was no horror of colonialism, and we put into the foreground of the game the traditions and cultures of Native American people in its world, and working with those actual real world people to create this game and encourage players to imagine stories that
Mhm.
challenge that sort of Western canon behind it. Journeys through the Radiant Citadel. We've talked about this before, and we interviewed Ajit George on this show. Um, incredible project with nearly 50 creators of color and transcending that idea of the typical Eurocentric fantasy with complex stories that were based off of the authors being said, bring in your culture into this and create this Radiant Citadel that's sort of a myriad of stories and perspectives. Rosenstrass, role playing game by Moria Turkington and Jessica Hammer by Unruly Designs. It is a tabletop freeform scenario. I had not heard of this. It sounds fascinating. Strongly defined historical story weaving the lives of 4 pairs of men and women bound by love under the chokehold of Nazi Germany. And you basically play through 2 characters to develop ties as the clock ticks forward and brings all of these impacts to you with personal losses and tests to your marriage and ideologies and things like that. It has some really innovative mechanics, well researched, treats the topic with deep respect. Sounds fascinating. Not my kind of emotional roller coaster, but for those who can handle that, really cool.
Mhm.
Cole Werle, a game designer, Whirl. I'm sure the pronunciation of the last name. Sorry, Cole. A game designer,
I think
creative
it's
director,
Whirley.
Wele, director at
Whirly.
Leader Games,
Mhm.
and co-founder of Whirligig
Whirligig.
Games.
Mhm.
From largely commercial work like Root and Oath to his work on Pax Pamir and other historical games, doing some of the finest work in board game design. So you can see link in our show notes or go to dianajonesaward.org to see all of those finalists and read about them. One thing that I thought was really interesting, I can't help but saying as the opinionated person that I am, was Linda Kodeg on Twitter, where they started a thread kind of saying like, it sounded to me like I should win this, and kind of walking through step by step the story of the OGL, and sort of basically saying like, I caused the OGL to go the way it did and for D&D to end up in the Creative Commons. And I thought was really interesting and ties into, you and I have in the past talked about journalism in this day and age and how different it is from the journalism we grew up with, because this is something a journalist would never have done, right? A journalist when we grew up would never promote their action behind a story. They silently drive the story, and the story speaks for itself. And I thought it was really interesting. And the caution that I would raise here is that I have seen many times in our industry where someone, including myself, has had the hubris to think that they made something happen. And then later you see actually all these other folks were involved in it and caused it to happen also, if not instead of. And I can think of any number of examples, and many of which I can't share, where someone said that they had done a thing, but I knew it was really because of some other reason, right? Or someone said to me, I thought I'd done this, and then it turned out that it was a corporate decision or totally unrelated. So I just, anybody out there, I would just say, be careful about assuming that you have been the sole agent of change for any one issue in our industry.
My stance on awards in general are well known, so I do not need to add anything else to what Teos has said. Congratulations to all of the nominees.
Yeah, and that's not to take away from the good
we're
work
Americans.
being done.
Exactly. We're Americans, you and I, Teos, I believe.
Yes. Yes, I have 2 passports. One of them is an American passport.
There you go. Would you say you are neutral good?
I actually would. Yeah. How about you?
You would? Okay. Well, I don't believe in alignments. So I think I am every alignment depending on the situation that I'm in.
Wow.
So
that's what a chaotic neutral person would say.
According to precisely. So a YouGov UK study from March of 2021 asked 24,000 Americans 2 questions. Those questions were used to determine where they fell on the alignment table. So this followed an earlier British study of Brits being asked the same question. And 29% of the Americans, based on this study, were considered to be neutral good. The second largest was lawful good at 21%. So that's 60% right there, covering 50% right there, neutral good and lawful good. True neutral came in at 13%, 11% came in at chaotic neutral. And the article also varied by generation. And Teos can take over from here.
Yeah, I mean, young generations favor neutral groups. If you're chaotic neutral, well, 60% of millennial or adult members of Gen Z were chaotic neutral. Older generations favor the good groups. I thought that was interesting, versus neutrality. Chaotic groups tend to be male dominated. Women tend towards lawful neutral. Under 1% are in each of the evil categories, but Shawn, I gotta wonder, like maybe they didn't reach enough CEOs.
Yeah, it's true. Of those 24,000 Americans, probably very few multimillionaires or billionaires were in that study, and may have come in some of the lower 3 of this grid. And it's just fascinating. There's a link in our show notes there where you can look at that report. Yeah. And of course, asking someone what they think they are is much different from figuring out what they actually are. Character is who you are in the dark. So there you go.
I like that.
The high cost of art was covered in a blog article by Chris Bissett, where he examined the art in role-playing game books from the perspective of a small publisher or creator. You covered this more in depth than I did, Teos, so take it away.
It's fascinating. I mean, basically, what he's doing is he's saying we have this drive from books like fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons that are so gorgeous that tend to propel everybody, all especially consumers, to think this is how books must be. And so he started with sort of these expectations by asking people, I think primarily on Twitter, what do you think about art? And it essentially translated to a piece of art per 2-page spread, right? So you're opening the book and you're seeing at least one piece of art. So then he goes back and he says, well, what's the cost of that, right? If we break down that you want a full color cover and you want four full page illustrations and 14 pieces of spot art, all for just a 40-page product. And he works that out to say that this 40-page product would cost about $2,350 to create just for the art, right? We're not talking about layout, we're talking about editing or writing or any of that. And then he says, well, what's it take to break even on that? So you'd have to sell 360 copies on drive-through to break even. And he says, well, what's the metal percentage, right? And well, very few products reach that. But, what if we talk about print publishing? Art is expanding the number of pages, the cost of printing and mailing. So he looks at this example with the $2,350 and says, well, that's spent on the art. Now you have to print it. That adds $350 for a total of around $2,700, not including all the other costs. And for those 200 copies, the only way to be profitable is to have a $13.50 price for the 40-page product. But wait a minute, what if you have retail and distribution? Now you're really only getting half of that. So your product has to cost $27 to break even. And then he looks at things like, well, what if you talk about the actual cost of writing? And just even at 10 cents a word and how this all works, looks at, and he really breaks it down, right? He looks at like, well, what if we reduce the print cost and we do this percentage digital, this percentage? It's really fascinating. I invite everybody to look at our show notes and his actual blog, where he goes into great detail for all of it. All of it is basically terrible. Whichever way you look at it, you're asking.
Yeah.
What his basic point is consumers are asking us to spend an amount on our product that is statistically doomed to fail, right? So he says like 7.2% of all drive-through products sell over 250 copies. So for one of the strategies here, just kind of almost impossible. And he also cites the story of Jason Bullman, who works at Paizo, one of the top guys at Paizo. And Jason shared on Twitter the cost of an adventure that he published for Pathfinder. This is his own project, right? Just to make extra scratch on the side. So Jason spent $2,500 without counting his own time, which he said was over 80 hours. Jason said he needed 384 sales at $10 for this adventure to break even through drive-through, or 600 to cover his time, right? So either 384 or 600, depending on whether you include time or not. Currently, the product is copper. So he has fewer than 100 sales, and he's the lead designer at Paizo. And he needed three, so he's not a third of the way to what he needs to cover his costs.
And so when we talk about Wizards of the Coast raising its prices as being a good thing, like we were saying, that allows other publishers to be able to make a product that the people seem to want, and pay a price for it that is commensurate with the cost to create. This doesn't include mailing. This doesn't include so many other things that we didn't even touch on. It's expensive to create a print product, and the industry has been stuck in this. Well, it only costs $9.99 in 1980 to buy a module. Why am I paying $20 for it now? For a lot of reasons.
Yeah, and those old adventures were like 10 pages long.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so finally, let's talk about crowdfunding. Let's talk about new releases. Congratulations, Kobold Press. More than $1 million for Tales of the Valiant. The Kickstarter ended a few days ago, and it was at $1,151,914 with over 10,000 backers, 10,057.
Wow.
What do you think, Teos?
I mean, you know what did it? We had
What
Celeste
did
on our
it, Teos?
show. I mean, it's the
Uh,
Mastering Dungeons bump.
that was it.
It's obvious. I mean,
Yeah,
I think our check is in the
I'm
mail.
sure the nearly half. Yeah, I'm sure the nearly, well over $500,000 they made within the first 3 days before Celeste came on the show was people seeing the future and knowing that she was going to be on the show. Uh, no, that's great news
Yeah.
for everybody at Cobalt Press and everybody involved in the project. So, congratulations. And the Ethereal Expanse is still in Kickstarter mode for Ghostfire Gaming. So we do appreciate at Ghostfire everyone's support so far. You still have a couple weeks to back it if you so choose, but I hope that you do check it out.
Fantastic. Yeah, and
Anything else, Teos,
I just
on
got a
the on the
Empty
news?
Black's latest magic item book arrived in my inbox from my having backed that. I'm excited to look at it. I haven't yet.
Mm-hmm. And I just saw a tweet from Wizards just a few moments ago talking about the practically complete guide to dragons,
Oh, yeah.
which you can pre-order now, and it looks like a one of those neat books that's not necessarily game specific, but has a lot of art, neat background information, and so on for the D&D fans out there. So we will keep an eye on that as well.